The morning sun barely peeked through the towering buildings of downtown as a young mother in her early 30s took her usual spot on the corner of Pine Street. Her daughter, just 4 years old, was curled up in a weathered stroller wrapped in a faded but clean pink blanket. The mother's eyes, though tired, held a fierce determination as she pulled out her old guitar from its worn case. Life hadn't always been this way for them. Just 3 years ago, she had worked as a kindergarten teacher, living in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment where her daughter's laughter would echo through the halls. But fate had other plans. First came the school budget cuts, then her mother's costly medical bills, and finally, the eviction notice that changed everything. Now, their world had shrunk to this street corner, a shelter bed when they were lucky, and the melodies that kept them going. The mother's voice, a gift she'd once used to entertain her students, had become their lifeline. As she began to strum her guitar, her fingers slightly stiff from the morning chill, a familiar tune filled the air. "When the rain starts to pour," she sang, her voice carrying over the rush of traffic and hurried footsteps. A few early morning commuters slowed their pace, some dropping coins or small bills into her open guitar case. Her voice had a way of making people stop, even if just for a moment, in their rushed routines. Her little girl stirred in the stroller, rubbing her eyes and offering a sleepy smile that could melt the coldest heart. "Mummy's singing," she whispered, her small voice filled with pride. Despite their circumstances, the mother had managed to keep her daughter's spirit bright. Each day, she would tell her stories about princesses who lived in cardboard castles and dragons who helped lost children find their way home. The morning crowd began to thicken, a stream of suits and coffee cups flowing past them. Some faces had become familiar over the months, the kind elderly man who always brought them hot chocolate, the office worker who shared her lunch, the teenager who would stop to draw pictures with her daughter. But most hurried by, their eyes fixed on phones or the ground, as if poverty might be contagious through eye contact. The mother didn't blame them. She remembered how she used to be, rushing to work, planning lessons, thinking her life was set on an unchangeable course. Now she knew better. Life could change in an instant, but she refused to let it break her spirit. Her daughter needed more than just food and shelter. She needed hope, and music was their bridge to a better tomorrow. As she moved into another song, her voice carried a story of resilience. The lyrics spoke of better days ahead, of dreams that refused to die, of love that could weather any storm. Her daughter swayed to the melody, occasionally joining in with her sweet, childish voice, making passers-by smile despite themselves. A group of tourists stopped to record her performance on their phones, but she didn't mind. Every dollar in her case meant another meal, another chance to keep her daughter healthy and safe. Between songs, she would tell her daughter stories about the people passing by, making up magical tales about where they might be going, keeping both their imaginations alive. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their corner of the world. The mother's throat was getting dry, but she kept singing. Each note carried their dreams. Each melody held their prayers, and somewhere in the city's endless stream of cars and people, she believed someone would hear more than just a song. They would hear their story, their hope, their unbreakable spirit. Little did she know that this ordinary morning would soon take an extraordinary turn, changing their lives forever. But for now, she sang, her voice rising above the city's chaos, a testament to the power of a mother's love and the strength of the human spirit. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the busy street as the young mother noticed her daughter's cheeks growing unusually flushed. Pressing her hand gently against the child's forehead, her heart sank. A fever was definitely setting in. The medicine they needed would cost more than she'd earned all morning, and the free clinic wouldn't open until tomorrow. With renewed determination, she adjusted her guitar strap and began singing with everything she had. Her voice, though tired from hours of performing, carried a mother's desperate love in every note. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound," she sang, the familiar hymn taking on new meaning as she watched her daughter drift in and out of uneasy sleep. The lunch crowd was thinning now, but she couldn't stop. Not today. Each person who passed was a potential helping hand, though most walked by as if she were invisible. She learned to focus on her music instead of their averted gazes, pouring her heart into each song as if it were her last. Her daughter's occasional coughs pierced through the melody, making her voice quiver with worry. A young office worker, who usually rushed past with her phone pressed to her ear, paused today. Perhaps it was the way the mother's voice cracked with emotion, or how the little girl curled up in her stroller, looking smaller and more vulnerable than usual. The woman dropped a $10 bill in the guitar case and knelt to offer the child her unopened bottle of water. "Take care, sweetie," she whispered, her eyes meeting the mother's with unexpected kindness. That brief moment of human connection gave the mother strength to continue. She seamlessly transitioned into Bridge Over Troubled Water, her voice carrying above the street noise. A group of high school students stopped to listen, their chatter quieting as the song's message touched something in their young hearts. One boy, probably no older than 16, pulled out his lunch money and added it to her growing collection. The mother had learned to read the crowds over the months. Mornings were for rushed commuters, minimal eye contact, but reliable small changes. Lunch brought office workers, some regulars who would share their food or spare dollars. Afternoons were unpredictable. Tourists who might film her performance, locals who'd seen her so often they'd started to care, and occasionally, those who'd tell her to move along. But today was different. Her songs carried extra weight, each note wrapped in a prayer for her daughter's health. When the little girl woke briefly, asking for water in her small, raspy voice, the mother's heart nearly broke. She'd already given her the last drops from their shared bottle an hour ago. A street vendor from the hot dog cart across the way noticed. Without a word, he walked over with a fresh bottle of water and a warm pretzel. "For the little one," he said gruffly, then returned to his cart before she could thank him properly. The mother's eyes welled with tears as she helped her daughter sip slowly. As the afternoon wore on, her fingers grew sore from playing, but she wouldn't stop. She sang songs of hope, of better days, of dreams that refused to die. Her daughter's fever seemed to be rising, making her more restless in the stroller. Between songs, she would stroke her child's hair, humming softly, promising that everything would be okay. A couple of teenagers stopped to drop some coins in her case, then lingered to request a song. The mother obliged with a current pop hit, adding her own soulful twist that made even the jaded teen smile. Her daughter perked up slightly at the familiar tune, her small voice joining in for a few words before fatigue overtook her again. The mother checked her earnings discreetly, still not enough for both medicine and dinner. She'd go without food herself if she had to. Her daughter's health came first. As rush hour approached, she prayed for a miracle, knowing that sometimes they came in the most unexpected ways. Her voice rose stronger, carrying both her fears and her hopes into the gathering dusk. Little did she know that fate was about to answer her prayers in a way she never could have imagined. As the evening traffic began to build, a luxury car unlike any she'd seen before would soon stop at her corner, bringing with it a chance that would change everything. But for now, she sang on, her voice a beacon of resilience in the urban chaos, her love for her daughter transforming simple songs into powerful prayers for deliverance. The evening traffic crawled through the city streets like a tired river, brake lights painting everything in a soft red glow. The mother's voice had grown hoarse from hours of singing, but she couldn't stop, not with her daughter's fever still rising. The medicine they needed felt further away with each passing minute. As she started another song, her fingers trembling slightly on the guitar strings, a midnight blue Bentley eased to a stop at the red light. The car looked out of place in this part of town, its polished surface reflecting the street lights like a mirror. The mother kept singing, though her heart beat faster. Luxury cars usually meant either generous tips or security being called. The gentle humming of the Bentley's engine provided an unexpected bass line to her melody. Through the gathering darkness, she could make out the silhouette of someone in the back seat. The tinted window rolled down with a quiet whir, revealing an elderly gentleman in an expertly tailored suit. His silver hair caught the streetlight, and his eyes, kind but sharp, focused entirely on her performance. The light turned green, but the Bentley didn't move. Cars behind it started honking, their impatient blares cutting through her song. The gentleman raised his hand slightly, and his driver pulled the car over to the curb, out of traffic. The mother's voice wavered for just a moment before she steadied herself, continuing her song while keeping a protective eye on her sleeping daughter. "Please don't stop," the elderly man said softly when she reached the end of her song. His voice carried the warmth of someone used to putting others at ease. "I haven't heard such genuine emotion in a performance since," he trailed off, lost in some distant memory. "What's troubling your little one?" The mother hesitated, years of street-learned caution warring with desperation. Her daughter's soft cough made the decision for her. "She's sick," she explained, her voice rough from singing. "I'm trying to earn enough for medicine." She stroked her daughter's hot forehead, her touch gentle despite her calloused fingers. The gentleman stepped out of his car, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who had seen many years but refused to be slowed by them. His driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, hurried to open an umbrella as a light drizzle began to fall. The elderly man waved it away, instead asking the driver to hold it over the sleeping child. "I've spent my life in the music industry," the gentleman said, studying the mother's worn guitar with interest. "Started as a sound engineer in a tiny studio, worked my way up to producing some of the biggest names in the business. But it's been years since I've heard a voice that made me stop my car in traffic." The mother clutched her guitar tighter, unsure how to respond. She'd heard plenty of promises before, seen too many dreams dissolve into disappointment. But something about his manner, the way he looked at her daughter with grandfatherly concern rather than pity, felt different. "Would you sing one more song?" he asked, settling himself on a nearby bench despite his expensive suit. "Something that really matters to you." His driver adjusted his position to keep the umbrella over the stroller, shielding the sick child from the increasingly steady rain. Taking a deep breath, the mother began to sing a lullaby, one she'd composed herself during their first night in the shelter. It spoke of stars guiding lost travelers home, of guardian angels watching over sleeping children, of love stronger than any storm. Her voice, though tired, carried years of hopes and fears, of fierce maternal love and unshakable determination. As she sang, more people gathered despite the rain. A teenage girl wiped tears from her eyes. A tough-looking businessman in a hurry found himself standing still, his phone forgotten in his hand. Even the hot dog vendor across the street stopped his end-of-day cleanup to listen. The elderly gentleman sat completely still, his eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. When the last note faded into the city noise, he remained quiet for a long moment. The mother's daughter stirred in her sleep, coughing again, and reality crashed back in. She needed medicine, not applause. But before she could start another song, the gentleman stood up, decision written across his face. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice carrying both authority and kindness. "But first, let's get your little one some medical attention." He gestured toward his car, that must have seen the fear flash across her face. "You'll remain in control. My driver can take us to any hospital you choose. Sometimes life offers us a chance, and we have to be brave enough to take it." The rain fell harder now, but neither of them moved. The mother looked at her daughter, then at the gentleman, then back at her daughter. In that moment, standing on her usual corner as the city lights began to blur in the rain, she faced a choice that would change everything. Sometimes, she realized, miracles don't appear as we expect them to. Sometimes they arrive in midnight blue Bentleys, driven by fate disguised as a chance encounter. The pediatric emergency room buzzed with quiet efficiency as the elderly gentleman made a few quiet phone calls. The mother sat beside her daughter's bed, watching as the nurse gently administered medicine through an IV drip. Everything had happened so quickly. The car ride, the admission, the immediate medical attention. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "Your little one will be just fine," the gentleman said, returning to the room. "Just a bad case of flu, but they caught it in time." He settled into a chair nearby, his presence somehow both commanding and comforting. "Now, perhaps we should properly introduce ourselves." Over the next hour, as her daughter's fever slowly broke, the gentleman shared his story. He'd spent over 4 decades in the music industry, starting as a young sound engineer in the 1970s. His eyes lit up as he spoke about discovering raw talent in unexpected places, a janitor who became a jazz legend, a waitress whose voice now filled stadiums. "But I retired 5 years ago," he said, watching the little girl sleep peacefully. "The industry changed. Everything became too manufactured. I missed the real voices, the ones that tell stories through their songs." He turned to the mother. "Like yours." The mother listened, her hand never leaving her daughter's. She learned how he produced some of the biggest albums of the past decades, worked with legends whose songs she used to sing on her street corner. But it was the way he spoke about music, like it was magic, like it could change lives, that made her begin to trust him. "The first time I heard you sing," he continued. I heard something rare. Pain, yes, but also hope. Love. The kind of voice that makes people stop and feel something real. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I have a home studio. Not the big professional setup I used to have, but good equipment. And I have connections, people who still answer my calls. The little girl stirred, opening her eyes. Mommy? She called softly. The mother immediately leaned closer, stroking her daughter's hair. The gentleman watched their interaction, a gentle smile crossing his face. Hi there, sweetheart, he said to the child. Your mommy has the most beautiful voice I've ever heard. Did you know that? The little girl nodded seriously, pride shining through her tired eyes. She sings like an angel, she said with absolute conviction, making both adults smile. A nurse came in to check vitals, commenting on how much better the fever looked. The mother felt tears of relief threatening to fall. Just hours ago, she'd been desperate for medicine she couldn't afford. Now her daughter was receiving the best care possible, all because someone had actually stopped to listen. I have a guest house, the gentleman said once they were alone again. It's been empty since my daughter moved to Europe last year. It has its own entrance, a small kitchen. He held up his hand as the mother began to protest. Consider it a business arrangement. You'll work with me in the studio, develop your talent. In exchange, you and your little one have a safe place to stay while we see where this goes. The mother looked around the hospital room at the care her daughter was receiving, care she could never have afforded on her own. Why? She asked finally. Why help us? The gentleman was quiet for a moment, looking at a framed photo on his phone. A much younger version of himself with a small girl on his shoulders. I had help once, he said softly. Back when I was just starting out. My wife had passed, leaving me with our daughter. A studio owner took a chance on me, gave me a job when I desperately needed one. He said talent deserves a chance to grow. He looked up at the mother. Sometimes life comes full circle. Outside the hospital window, the city lights twinkled like stars. The mother's daughter had drifted back to sleep, her breathing finally easy and regular. The gentleman's driver appeared at the door with cups of hot coffee for both of them. You don't have to decide right now, the gentleman said, passing her a cup. But know that this isn't charity. I've been looking for real talent, authentic voices, stories that need to be told. You have that. The question is, are you ready to share it with more than just the passing crowd? The mother looked at her sleeping daughter, then back at the gentleman. In his eyes, she saw not pity but genuine belief in her ability. After years of struggling, of singing on street corners and sleeping in shelters, someone was offering them not just help, but dignity. A chance to build something real. The night deepened outside as they talked more, planning and dreaming. Sometimes, the mother realized, angels don't appear with wings and halos. Sometimes they arrive in expensive suits, carrying decades of music industry experience and hearts big enough to help strangers in need. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the guest house, painting everything in warm golden hues. The mother stood in the small kitchen, barely believing her eyes. A real stove, a refrigerator humming quietly, clean countertops. It felt like stepping into a dream. Her daughter was still asleep in the bedroom, tucked into a real bed for the first time in months. The previous night's drive from the hospital had been surreal. The gentleman's driver had stopped at a pharmacy to fill her daughter's prescriptions, then at a small grocery store for essential supplies. Now, looking at the boxes of cereal and fresh fruit on the counter, the mother felt tears welling up in her eyes. But these were different tears from the ones she'd grown used to. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. The gentleman stood there, casual in a sweater rather than his usual suit. I thought you might like to see the studio, he said warmly. Your little one can rest. My housekeeper will keep an ear out. She's already quite taken with her. The mother hesitated, maternal instinct warring with opportunity. As if reading her mind, a kind-faced woman appeared behind the gentleman. Don't worry, she said with a gentle smile. I raised 4 of my own. We'll bake cookies when she wakes up. The studio, it turned out, was far more than just a room with equipment. Hidden behind the main house's library, it was a professional setup that put many commercial studios to shame. My retirement project, the gentleman explained, running his hand along a mixing board. Music never really lets you go. I don't know anything about recording, the mother admitted, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. The gentleman just smiled. Neither did I when I first started. But you have something more important. A voice that makes people feel something real. They spent the morning doing simple vocal exercises, the gentleman occasionally adjusting settings on the equipment, just getting levels, he explained. Sing whatever feels natural. So she sang lullabies she'd made up for her daughter, old hymns that had kept her going through hard times, even snippets of popular songs she'd learned to please the crowds. Around noon, her daughter's voice echoed through the intercom. "Mommy, we made cookies." The gentleman chuckled at the excitement in the child's voice. "Perhaps we should take a lunch break," he suggested. "Besides, I think we've got something special here already." Over lunch in the main house's sunny kitchen, the gentleman played back some of the morning's recordings. The mother barely recognized her own voice, clear, strong, with a depth of emotion that brought goosebumps to her arms. Her daughter sat on her lap, munching happily on still warm cookies, occasionally singing along with the recordings. "You've been holding back," the gentleman said thoughtfully. "Even in the street, as good as you were holding something back." The mother nodded slowly. "I couldn't let everything out," she admitted. "Some feelings, they're too big when you're trying to survive." "That's what we need to capture," he said, his eyes lighting up with professional excitement. The real story. Not just survival, but hope. Love, the strength it takes to sing when the world has turned its back. He paused, watching the mother and daughter together. People need to hear that story. The afternoon passed in a blur of recordings, conversations, and planning. The gentleman introduced her to music theory basics, showing her how to read simple notation. "We'll get you proper lessons," he promised. "But for now, let's focus on capturing your natural talent." As evening approached, they sat in the studio's small lounge area, discussing next steps. "I've called some old friends," the gentleman said. "People who can help with arrangements, production, but everything moves at your pace. You and your little one need time to settle, to feel secure." The mother looked out the window at the gathering dusk. Just yesterday, she'd been singing on a street corner, desperate for medicine money. Now she sat in a professional studio, her daughter safe and happy, planning a future she'd stopped believing was possible. "There will be challenges," the gentleman warned gently. "The industry isn't always kind. But you have something real, something genuine. That's rare these days." He handed her a small notebook. "Start writing down your songs, your stories. People need to hear them." Back in the guest house that evening, the mother tucked her daughter into bed. The little girl was chattering excitedly about the cookies she helped bake, the grand piano she'd seen in the living room, the magical studio where Mommy's voice lived in the machines. "Are we going to stay here?" her daughter asked sleepily. The mother stroked her hair, thinking about the day's events, about the genuine opportunity she'd been offered. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're going to stay here and make music." As her daughter drifted off to sleep, the mother sat by the window, notebook in hand. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to truly feel everything: the pain, the fear, the hope, the gratitude. And as the stars appeared in the darkening sky, she began to write, turning her journey into lyrics, her struggles into songs. Sometimes, she realized, the greatest music comes from the moments when we think we've lost everything, only to find something even more precious: a second chance. 3 months had passed since that rainy evening on the street corner. The mother sat at a small desk in the guest house, her laptop open to an online music business course. Her daughter's artwork decorated the walls, colorful drawings of microphones, musical notes, and their new extended family: the gentleman, his housekeeper, and the kind-faced driver who always carried candies in his pockets. The change in their lives went far beyond having a roof over their heads. Each day brought new learning, new challenges, and new victories. The mother's voice had grown stronger, more confident, as she worked with vocal coaches the gentleman arranged. Her daughter attended a nearby prep school, coming home each day with stories about friends and songs learned in music class. "Ready for today's session?" the gentleman asked, appearing at the door. He'd taken to wearing more casual clothes around the studio, though his eyes retained that sharp professional gleam. The mother nodded, gathering her notebook. Inside, she'd written dozens of songs over the past months, stories of struggle, hope, and redemption that the gentleman said needed to be heard. The studio had become a second home. She understood the equipment now, could adjust microphone levels herself, and had learned to layer harmonies in ways that made her simple street songs bloom into full productions. Today, they were working on a special project, her first original song meant for release. "Let's try that bridge again," the gentleman suggested, adjusting something on the mixing board. "Remember what we talked about, let the emotion build naturally." The mother closed her eyes, thinking back to those nights in the shelter, the way she'd sing softly to her daughter, promising better days ahead. The memory filled her voice with a power that made the gentleman sit up straighter. "That's it," he said quietly, not wanting to break her concentration. "That's the magic." His fingers moved across the controls, capturing every nuance of her performance. Later, he played it back, and the mother hardly recognized her own voice, rich, powerful, filled with an authenticity that no amount of technical training could create. Between recording sessions, she attended online classes, learning about music copyright, contract negotiations, and digital distribution. The gentleman had insisted on this education. "Talent is essential," he told her, "but knowledge is power in this industry." Her daughter thrived in their new environment. The housekeeper taught her to bake, the driver helped her practice reading, and the gentleman often sat with her at the grand piano, teaching her simple melodies. She'd grown healthier, happier, her laugh echoing through the house like music of its own. One evening, as they worked late in the studio, the gentleman received a phone call that made his eyes light up. "Remember that demo we sent out last week?" he said after hanging up. "A small radio station wants to play it. They're interested in your story." The mother's hands trembled as she held her notebook. From street corner to radio, it seemed impossible. Yet here she was, recording professional quality music, her daughter safe and flourishing, their future brightening with each passing day. "We'll need to prepare you for interviews," the gentleman said, already planning. "People will want to know your story. It's not just about the music, it's about hope, about second chances." He paused, watching her process this news. "Are you ready for that?" The mother thought about other people out there, struggling as she had, needing to hear that change was possible. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to share our story." Her daughter's latest drawing caught her eye, a picture of them singing together on a big stage, the audience full of smiling faces. That night, after tucking her daughter into bed, the mother sat at their kitchen table with her notebook. The gentleman had left her with homework, to write her story in her own words, not just as lyrics, but as a narrative. As she wrote, memories flooded back. The fear of those first nights on the street, the kindness of strangers, the power of music to open hearts and change lives. Her phone buzzed with a message, the gentleman sending her the final mix of her song. She plugged in her earphones and listened, tears flowing freely as her voice filled her head. The music carried every moment of their journey, every struggle and triumph, every dream that refused to die. Tomorrow would bring more lessons, more recording sessions, more steps toward their new life. There would be challenges ahead. The music industry was no fairy tale, as the gentleman often reminded her. But for now, in the quiet of their cozy guest house, surrounded by her daughter's artwork and the tools of her emerging career, the mother felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. She opened her laptop to work on her online course, determination driving her forward. Every bit of knowledge gained was another step away from that street corner, another brick in the foundation of their new life. Sometimes, she realized, the path to recovery isn't just about healing, it's about growing stronger, learning more, and believing in the magic of second chances. 1 year had passed since that life-changing evening on the street corner. The mother stood backstage at a small but well-known local music venue, peeking through the curtain at the gathering crowd. Her heart raced as she spotted her daughter in the front row, sitting between the gentleman and his housekeeper, practically bouncing with excitement in her new dress. The past year had been a journey of transformation. Her first single, Corner Grace, had started playing on local radio stations 3 months ago. The song told their story, of hope surviving on city streets, of angels appearing in unexpected forms, of love that refused to surrender to circumstance. Its raw honesty had touched hearts, and slowly but surely, people began to take notice. 5 minutes, the stage manager whispered, giving her a supportive thumbs up. The mother took a deep breath, smoothing her simple but elegant outfit, so different from the worn clothes she'd worn on the streets. Her old guitar, now professionally restored, waited on stage. She'd insisted on keeping it, a reminder of where they'd come from. The gentleman had taught her well over the past year. Your story is your strength, he'd always said. Don't polish it too much. Let people hear the truth in your voice. She'd taken those words to heart, refusing to let studio techniques overshadow the raw emotion that had first made him stop his car. Her daughter's voice carried from the audience. "That's my mummy," she heard her say proudly to someone nearby. The mother smiled, remembering how far they'd come. Her little girl now attended a good school, took piano lessons, and had more friends than she could count. The painful memories of their street days were fading, replaced by new ones of bedtime stories in their cozy home, weekend baking sessions with the housekeeper, and countless hours spent in the studio making music. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd. This wasn't just another performance. This was her first official concert, a milestone marking their journey from survival to success. The gentleman had helped arrange everything, but insisted she take full credit. "This is your moment," he'd said during rehearsal. "You've earned it." As she stepped onto the stage, guitar in hand, the spotlight felt different from the street corner sunlight she'd known so well. The audience welcomed her with warm applause, some familiar faces from local radio interviews, others complete strangers who'd connected with her story. Her daughter's beaming face shone brightest of all. "Thank you all for coming," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her nerves. "A year ago, I was singing on street corners, trying to feed my little girl. Today, I'm here because someone stopped to listen." She glanced at the gentleman, who nodded encouragingly. "This first song is called Corner Grace. It's for everyone who's ever needed a miracle." Her fingers found the familiar chords, and she began to sing. The song started softly, like a lullaby, before building into a powerful story of survival and hope. In the front row, her daughter sang along to every word, knowing this song as intimately as any bedtime story. The audience sat spellbound as she moved through her set list. Each song carried a piece of their journey: the cold nights, the warm hearts of strangers, the power of music to bridge gaps between people. Between songs, she shared snippets of their story, watching eyes grow wet with tears and heads nod in understanding. Halfway through the concert, she invited her daughter to join her on stage for a special song they'd written together. The little girl, no longer shy, practically ran up the steps. Together, they sang about their new life, their voices blending in a way that only shared joy can create. The audience's response was thunderous. As the concert drew to a close, the mother looked out at the sea of faces, all these people who'd come to hear their story. In the back of the venue, she spotted a young woman with a child, their worn clothes telling a familiar tale. The mother made a mental note to speak with them after the show. Sometimes, she realized, the best way to honor a miracle is to help create another one. For her final song, she chose the lullaby she'd composed during their first night in the shelter. But this time, it wasn't a prayer for survival, it was a celebration of how far they'd come, and a beacon of hope for others still finding their way. The applause that followed felt like a warm embrace. Her daughter rushed back on stage for a bow, and the gentleman stood up, leading a standing ovation. But the mother's eyes kept returning to the woman and child in the back. Tomorrow, she would talk to the gentleman about them. After all, music had given them a second chance. Now it was time to pass that gift forward. Later that night, as she tucked her daughter into bed in their comfortable home, the little girl asked, "Are we famous now, Mommy?" The mother smiled, stroking her hair. "No, sweetheart, we're just blessed. And sometimes, when you're blessed, you get to be a blessing to others." As her daughter drifted off to sleep, the mother sat at their window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, other voices were singing on street corners, other hearts were holding on to hope. Her journey wasn't just about rising from the streets, it was about proving that with love, determination, and a little help, anyone could rise. The music that had once been their survival had become their mission, their message, their way of showing that every life deserved a second verse.